In 1996, Iomega published a price for asking a question, $14.99 to speak to someone about a zip drive, $19.99 for a jazz. The charge applied per call, whether the call solved anything or not. Within 2 years, a large share of those calls were about a clicking sound. By the time a customer heard it, the drive had usually destroyed the disk inside it. Iomega sold $1,739 million of hardware in 1997 and made $115 million on it. 4 years later, sales were $834 million, the company lost $93 million, and the payroll had fallen from 4,816 people to 2,097. Everyone who owned one of these remembers the clicking. Almost nobody describes it correctly. The click of death was not contagious, and the man who took the drive apart said so in public while the lawsuits were still being filed. What was actually happening is stranger, and it explains how one component took down a company with none of the usual problems. You remember the disk, thicker than a floppy, the same footprint, a hard shell in blue or gray with a steel shutter that snapped shut as you pulled it out of the sleeve. It went in the bag with the work you could not afford to lose. Iomega had not always sold to people like that. Through the 1980s, it built the Bernoulli box, a removable cartridge system for professionals, priced in the thousands and covered by a 90-day warranty. Well-engineered and a niche. Annual sales sat around $141 million. Kim B. Edwards joined as president and chief executive in January 1994 from Gates Energy Products with a background in marketing rather than engineering. His diagnosis was that the company was selling to the wrong people. Iomega, Edwards told the New York Times in 1995, had been out of touch with the 50 million or so new computer users. The zip drive shipped in March 1995. 100 megabytes on a flexible disk inside a rigid cartridge, 70 times the capacity of a floppy and up to 20 times the speed. The external drive settled at $149, the internal one lower. The price was the strategy. Iomega made very little on the drive and made its money on the cartridges at $12.95 each in multipacks. A Salt Lake City public relations executive named David Politis put the model to the Deseret News in one line: create razors, sell blades. Iomega was in court at the time against a French firm called Nomai over compatible discs, which tells you how seriously it took the blades. At the time, that read as a pricing decision. What it actually did was make Iomega's profit depend on one thing above all others. Customers had to trust the discs. For 3 years they did. By the end of 1997, more than 11 million zip drives had shipped. Edwards persuaded the industry to build the drive into machines rather than sell it alongside them, and by March 1998, 24 manufacturers offered zip as standard or optional equipment, among them Apple, Compaq, Dell, Gateway, Hewlett-Packard, IBM, and Sony. Sales reached $1.74 billion. A proprietary format nobody had standardized had become the thing you handed across a desk. Inside, the zip drive was much closer to a hard disk than to the floppy it replaced. 2 Winchester-type nanoslide heads rode on a linear voice coil actuator. The disk spun at 2,941 revolutions per minute. Loading the heads was the delicate part. As they entered the cartridge, 2 silver bars rode side ramps that lifted and separated them. Past that point, the ramps taper away and the heads clamp down onto the spinning surface. On ejection, they retract and come to rest on a small white pad, sliding a little as they settle. Iomega called that self-cleaning technology. Steve Gibson, a software author who photographed the mechanism in 1998, wrote that he was less than impressed and added that he had no better idea himself. That is the honest version. The drive was a clever, tightly toleranced machine built down to a consumer price, and it worked for millions of people. Then, in the winter of 1997 and 1998, drives began to click. Jim Louderback broke it into the mainstream press on the 17th of February 1998 in a column for PC Week, pointing readers at one of the user-run sites already tracking the problem. That site's mailing list had over 3,000 members. The reports had the same shape every time. A drive that had worked for a year began clicking, and within minutes or days, it took the cartridge with it. Then it took the next one. PC World and the newsletter BugNet reported that Iomega had acknowledged as many as 100,000 affected users and had no plans for a blanket replacement policy. The support line still cost $14.99 a call. Users worked out a test on their own. Take the clicking disk to another machine. If the second drive clicks too, the disk is carrying something. Put a healthy disk in the suspect drive. If that clicks, so is the drive. The conclusion spread faster than the fault. The click of death was infectious, and the advice that traveled with it was to quarantine your disks, never lend one, and never accept one from anybody else. That belief is wrong, and the correction comes from the one person who put the hardware on a bench with an oscilloscope. Gibson asked the affected community to mail him their dead drives and cartridges, tracked down an Iomega technical reference manual the company would not release, and published what he found. Iomega drives caused the click of death by writing incorrectly to the media. The miswriting damaged the customer's data and three things underneath it: the factory-written low-level format, the head positioning servo information, and a set of proprietary internal tracks Iomega called Z-tracks. Those are the references the drive uses to find anything at all, written at the factory, and no consumer drive could rewrite them. The clicking was the recovery routine. When the drive cannot locate or read what it is looking for, it retracts the heads out of the cartridge and pushes them straight back in. That recalibrates the head positioning mechanism, scrubs oxide deposits off the heads, and dumps any static charge. Clicking is the sound of a drive trying to fix itself over and over. So the second test proves nothing, and Gibson put that in capital letters. A cartridge that clicks in one drive and then clicks in another has not infected the second drive. It clicks because a failing drive already destroyed its factory formatting, and no drive on Earth can read it now. The damage never spread between drives. It traveled on the disk, and it traveled by the exact behavior the product existed to enable, which is why every user who carried a disk to a second machine to check confirmed a theory that was not true. Why 1997 and not 1995 is a separate question, and the answer is not the design. Gibson's read, after months of correspondence with users, was that Iomega had stopped building drives to the standard that earned the format its reputation. Something, he wrote, must have gone very wrong as the company scaled up manufacturing to meet the huge demand for what were originally very reliable drives. Consider what that ramp looked like. A company shipping expensive cartridge systems to professionals in the thousands per year was, within 3 years, shipping 11 million consumer drives whose head-loading tolerances are measured in fractions of a millimeter. The flaw was the volume itself. Put that against the business model, and the size of the problem changes. 100,000 affected users out of 11 million drives is under 1%, and Edwards said so publicly. As a defect rate, it is survivable. As an attack on a razors and blades company, it is not, because the failure did not damage drives. It damaged cartridges. The cartridge was the margin and the repeat purchase. Iomega needed people to keep putting important files onto $12 discs, and the field was now full of people who had lost one and told everybody they knew. Iomega's answer to that was to advertise. Selling, general and administrative expense went from $291.9 million in 1997 to $386.3 million in 1998. That is $94 million of additional spending, built around an advertising program reported at $125 million for the year. Over the same 12 months, sales fell, and net income went from $115 million of profit to a $54 million loss. They spent more on selling the drive in the bad year than in the year everybody wanted one. Edwards resigned on Wednesday, the 25th of March, 1998, giving no reason. The stock traded at $7.06 that morning. The board named James E. Sierk acting chief executive, a director whose previous job had been senior vice president of quality and productivity at Allied Signal. Chairman David J. Dunn credited Edwards with taking sales from $141 million to $1.7 billion, and said he very much regretted the departure. The company's posture did not change with the chief executive. Gibson had by then released a free 48-kilobyte diagnostic called Trouble in Paradise, which read a cartridge and reported failing sectors and head-seek errors before a user lost anything. A friend of his then received an email from an Iomega support agent warning that the program's author was a terminated Iomega employee whose software spun disks fast enough to overheat the heads and strip the magnetic coating. Gibson published the email. None of it was true, and no software can change the spindle speed of an Iomega drive. On the 10th of September 1998, a class action was filed in the Superior Court of Delaware. Rinaldi versus Iomega Corporation alleged that a defect in the company's zip drives caused an abnormal clicking noise that may indicate damage to the drive or the disks. The court approved a settlement on the 29th of June 2001. Class members received rebates on Iomega products. The company admitted no wrongdoing. By then, the market had moved on without needing to be asked. A blank recordable CD held 6.5 times what a zip disk held, and the format that had beaten the floppy never found a second act. Sales fell every year after 1997 to $834 million by 2001. Headcount halved and then halved again. EMC bought the company on the 8th of April 2008 for $3.85 a share, about $213 million, roughly 1/8 of a single good year. Sierk had told the board from the start that he did not want the job permanently, and he did not take it. Gibson still sells SpinRite. Trouble in Paradise is still on his server, 48 kilobytes, filed under obsolete, with 394,000 downloads logged against it, a diagnostic written by an outsider for a fault the manufacturer never acknowledged. The drives themselves are in cupboards and parts bins, and most of them still do one thing perfectly. There is a small hole in the back panel of every zip drive. Push a straightened paper clip into it, and a cam releases. A spring pulls the tray forward, the shutter slides closed, and the drive hands the cartridge back. No power, no controller, no working heads. The drive will always give the disc back. It just cannot tell you what is on it. If you ever carried one of these between two machines, subscribe, and the next one will find you.